The pressure on today's parents to control children's eating and try to keep their weight down is simply enormous and enormously destructive for both parents and children. The myth is that children are heavier than they should be because they eat too much and exercise too little, that they can lose weight if we could get them to eat less and exercise more. It is also destructive and unnecessary. As a clinician for many years, I know whereof I speak with respect to the harm that can be done with this weight preoccupation. My clinical work formed the basis for my writing, consulting, and training. If we are known to each other, it's probably because of my first book, Child of Mine, Feeding with Love and Good Sense. Over the decades of trial and error and being destructive and stop being destructive, I evolved kinder, gentler, and more possible ways of managing eating and feeding in the form of the Satter eating competence model, the Satter feeding dynamics model, and the Satter division of responsibility in feeding. I worked on research. I collaborated in validating the eating ECSI2 for testing eating competence and SDOR 2 to 6 years for testing adherence to the division of responsibility in feeding. I continue to train and consult as a volunteer for the Ellyn Satter Institute. I'm making this recording to address the American Academy of Pediatrics clinical practice guidelines for child obesity. American Academy of Pediatrics makes many very excellent statements that guide us all in supporting children and families with respect to health issues. This is not one of them. AAP has made child obesity statements in the past where they recognize the complexity of the issue and have been flexible in addressing treatment. This statement is rigid and inflexible. It recommends diagnosis of all children above the 85th percentile and high intensity treatment, including calorie restriction. As such, it will further increase the pressure on parents and children with respect to children's weight. These cutoff points are not new. Health policymakers have long defined the 85th and 95th percentiles, however misguided, as indicating child overweight and obesity. What is different with this statement is oversimplification of the problem and the severity of the one-size-fits-all treatment. Instead of following these guidelines, I hope to interest you in considering the issue in a totally different, compassionate, and responsible way to address child weight issues from the point of view of supporting children's amazing capability to eat as much as they need and grow consistently. In the talk I'm sharing with you right now, I tell you what to do. This professional webinar tells you why. It gives the research backing up what I am saying. Supporting children's natural growth involves harnessing the amazing, amazing power of the feeding relationship. That is, following the Satter division of responsibility in feeding. SDOR guides parents in taking leadership with the what, when, and where of feeding, and giving their child autonomy with the whether and how much of children's eating. According to testing with SDOR 2 to 6 years, a validated paper and pencil inventory, when parents follow SDOR, children have lower nutritional risks. Parents who, and that's not all, parents who manage the what, when, and where for themselves do better nutritionally as well. For the research backing that up in a bit, I'll point you to the Ellyn Satter research. SDOR trusts children and preserves their capabilities to learn to eat the food their parents eat, to know how much to eat, and to grow consistently. Trying to get children to lose weight intrudes on their capabilities and is crippling for them. Tomorrow's preschoolers, school-age children, and adolescents who overeat and gain too much weight are today's infants and toddlers who are taught to ignore their feelings of hunger and fullness and eat as much or as little as their parents want them to eat. SDOR is simple, but it is not easy. This list of parent jobs makes clear that avoiding conventional weight intervention is not the same as doing nothing at all. Parents taking leadership with feeding day after day, year after year is doing an enormous amount. It provides children with the security of knowing they'll be fed, and because of that, it preserves children's considerable ability to eat and grow well. Children don't gain too much weight out of thin air. Something negative has to happen to interfere with children's ability to regulate food intake and grow appropriately. That something generally is that parents with or without the prompting of health professionals undermine children's eating by trying to get them to eat certain food, eat certain amounts, or grow in certain ways. Children's normal eating behaviors are an advice and an interference magnet. Their eating is erratic and extreme. What they eat one day, they totally ignore the next day. Some are so enthusiastic with their eating that we think they'll never stop, and others are so blasé we think they will never start. It's little wonder that parents often try to compensate and create the very problems they set out to address. On the other hand, when parents follow SDOR, even the most cautious and picky child gradually learns to eat new food. Even the most erratic eater averages out to eat what they need, and even the most enthusiastic eater eats no more than they need. Parents are entitled to choose food they enjoy. They're most reliable with providing meals for the family when they do that. They're also better at eating a variety of food. And again, here I have cited this eating competence research, and there's a lot of it that says when people are eating competent, they eat food that they enjoy. They feed themselves faithfully, and they take good care of themselves with food. And the research shows they do better nutritionally and in all ways when they do that. But feeling obligated to provide healthy food creates a barrier to having meals. And trying to get children to eat that healthy food makes meals miserable and oftentimes makes parents give up on having family meals. To avoid interference with child weight, you have to understand normal growth. It's normal for children to grow consistently. This child is growing right along the 50th percentile. Half of children are heavier, half are lighter. He's just an average child who's not going to excite anybody, or they are an average child. Each time this child comes in for a health appointment, they are weighed and the weight plotted against their age. So a lot of internal integrity about this child's growth. This child grows consistently. Not only is this child's growth average, but it's so consistent that it's likely nobody's going to get excited about it. But a lot of people are going to get excited about this child's growth because at the same time as this child is growing very consistently, their growth is at or above the 95th percentile. And as you know, the rule states this child is obese. But it would be extremely misguided to diagnose this child as being obese. It's obvious that this is the child's genetic growth tendency. It is so consistent and persists over time. This child is a relatively big child, and so is going to attract interference. But the interference is just that. It is going to undermine this child's considerable integrity with respect to eating and growth. Children who are very small attract interference as well. The World Health Organization would classify this child as underweight, irrespective of context. This child is growing consistently along the 5th percentile. And so even though this child is small, even though his parents and probably health professionals were worried, it's important for them to keep their nerve and trust that this little one knows what they are doing. So the potential for normal growth is very broad and goes beyond what health policy defines as abnormal growth. However, not all growth is normal growth. Distortions in feeding can make a child gain weight faster than is right for them. This is Melissa's growth chart. A real little patient, although not by that name. Melissa's growth chart, her weight chart is very instructive. I think it's very interesting. Here we have a little girl who was born small, but did some catch-up growing. By 9 months of age, her weight had increased from right around or below the 5th percentile up above to the 50th percentile. A lot of children do this. It seems like they just don't have enough room to do their growing in the womb. So after they're born, they kind of make up for lost time. Very smooth, very consistent, nothing abrupt or jerky about this growth pattern. And Melissa demonstrated her ability to regulate food intake and grow consistently because once she got to the 50th percentile, which it seemed that her little body needed to get to, her weight leveled off and she grew consistently along the 50th percentile. But here we have a family crisis. The parents were out of commission and the domineering grandmother took over custody. Now, grandmother was one of these feeders who would not take no for an answer. So she regularly fed Melissa beyond the point where Melissa indicated that she had had enough, and she gained weight faster than was normal for her. Now, abrupt increase in weight, you don't always see this abrupt leveling off, but rapidly crossing growth percentiles. Father observed this force feeding, and he recognized it for what it was because he had been fed the same way when he was a kid. And so parents got Melissa back, and once again, she demonstrated her very impressive ability to regulate food intake. Her weight leveled off, although at a higher level. And so she again grew consistently right around the 95th percentile. So here we have starting at 25 months. Here's 18 to 25 months. Here's 25 months and above when the parents got her back. Now we're going to the 2 to 20-year growth chart. Again, weights on the vertical axis, age here, and you can see Melissa's stable growth continued until she was about 3.5 years old. Yeah, and here the pediatrician said, Melissa's obese. You have to cut her down. Well, the parents tried. They tried to get her to eat less than she was hungry for. They tried to get her to eat food that was not as appealing to her, but their hearts just weren't in it. They did not have they simply weren't able to make Melissa miserable. And so they tried to restrict her, which frightened Melissa and made her afraid she was going to go hungry. And so she put pressure on food and tried to, continually worked on getting food from them. And in the process, she ate too much and gained too much weight. Well, parents knew there was something the matter. They didn't know what, but they came to see me and we reviewed this history. We reviewed what had happened to them, and we talked about how they had felt at these different stages of the game and how they felt about being asked to restrict Melissa. And essentially encourage them to go back to doing what it seemed that they were intuitively doing in the first place, here when Melissa's weight stabilized, and here before they were counseled to restrict her. And that is following the division of responsibility in feeding. And they were so committed, in fact, that they were able to hang in there during the few weeks when Melissa ate like there was no tomorrow. Once they took the lid off her eating, at meals and at snacks, they allowed her to eat as much as she wanted, but didn't let her panhandle in between times. And eventually, Melissa's eating leveled off and her weight began to level off. So many times in my clinical life, I have longed to know what happened next, but it looks good at this point. And I've seen other children's weight extend out for a longer period of time, level off, and even start to go down slowly. We got to the bottom of what was going on with Melissa's weight and addressed the cause. We didn't just put a Band-Aid on the issue by restricting her food intake, because we saw how disastrous that had been for her. This workshop, the Feeding with Love and Good Sense Vision Workshop, teaches professionals to do what I did with Melissa. If a child you love has been identified as having a weight problem, do your best to get help from someone who has taken this training. It's a big change in thinking and practice to go away from restriction to intelligent feeding. And you need help to think and do in this kinder, gentler way. This handout, this no-cost handout that you can get from the Ellyn Satter Institute website, helps for parents, explains in practical terms what to do if you're concerned about a child's weight. Accept normal growth and follow SDOR. This handout notes your child's weight, helping with harming, one of my books that gives in-depth help in raising your child to have the body that is right for them, accepting that body, and raising them to appreciate what it does for them. This series of 40-page booklets tell you how to do an excellent job with feeding throughout the child's growing up years. The Ellyn Satter Institute website has many resources. Take the next step by checking out the How to Feed tab on the website. But bottom line, dare to be different. Act as an advocate for a child you love. Don't let them be damaged by this weight hysteria.